the chair of our legislative advocacy committee, excuse me, and he'll be sharing some of the perspective from the practitioners. He's also a CBO in Lindsay Unified. Also with me, an important character here at CASBO in the conversation we're having is Sarah Baches, Chief Government Relations Officer. And of course, we have 100 of our closest friends registered for this session today. And again, I want to emphasize the listening session. What we're going to be doing is spending the first few minutes just creating the framework for the conversations that we're about to have, both in sharing information that's sort of hot off the press, if you will, and from many of the discussions we've been having over at the Capitol, but also then pivoting and really hearing your input and your perspective framework that we're discussing. So we're going to jump right in a little bit about the considerations that are ahead of us. And as we think about reopening schools, we've really been spending considerable amount of time with three key entities really on a daily basis. One is the education management groups with CASBO, AXA, CSESA, CSBA, and the Small School Districts Association, really trying to get our arms around what it would take to reopen schools in an appropriate time with an appropriate budget. So that group is very unified in their commitment to ensure that the tail is not wagging the dog, but rather the practitioners are informing the policymakers around budget considerations and the like, and Sarah will share more of that. The second group is with the governor's office on what was an evening basis, has now moved to a couple of nights a week. We're working with Ben Cheetah and the governor's office to, again, inform some of those decisions that are being announced or made, and with key considerations around funding special education. Again, we'll spend some more time on that. And then finally, the superintendent of public instruction, Tony Thurman, has also brought together a group that does include labor and management, and we're participating actively in those conversations. So our goal is to capture input and to really better inform those decisions that are being made by the policymakers going forward. So with that, let's talk about some of the purpose and goals that we have in convening this group. The first is to explore and assess the implications associated with the varying models that are starting to surface in relation to reopening schools. Are those a model where maybe a student is going Tuesday, Thursday 1 week, and Monday, Wednesday following? Are we looking at starting our youth, our younger grades earlier? So there are a number of models surfacing there, and we want to understand the model that you are considering looking at. And then based on these varying options or these varying models, there are many considerations. We would be preaching to the choir to talk through these, but what we want to capture are those considerations around safety. And we're focused on for all employees and all students. And those employees, of course, include the classified side. The budget impact, Sarah will talk about that. Engaging collective bargaining, continued technology support, and so forth. I'm not going to read each of these to you, but I want you to know that CASBO is also convening the management team around each one of the disciplines that support these areas. So over the course of the next couple of weeks, we have a human resources conversation similar to today's, facilities, risk management, maintenance and operations, and continuing to talk to the CBO group to get this input. So again, a lot to do. We understand very clearly that everyone's still working intensely on the transition that just took place, and we are needing to pivot and look at that that model of reopening schools here in the next couple of months. We also today want to develop some key principles, some sort of buckets to help simplify this very complex issue, to guide our best practices, right? California has a very diverse education system. We do not believe that there will be one solution fits all in any of the options in opening schools. So how do we look at all of these considerations in the following buckets: policy and funding, continuity of learning, the conditions of learning, and leadership and planning. That's what CSBO is really capturing information on, digesting and analyzing that information with the intent to come back out with support, tools, and obviously the continued advocacy that our legislative team, both the CSBO team and certainly our legislative advocacy committee, have and continue to push for. We're going to talk about this important funding component, the legislative and regulatory areas that we need relief and flexibility as a part of today's conversation. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Grant just to share a little bit of what your district is experiencing as you consider returning to schools.
Thank you, Tasha. Hello, everybody. I'm sure you guys are all dealing with a lot of stuff we're dealing with. Just a little perspective from perspective of Lindsay Unified School District. We're a school district of about 4,000 learners, high poverty area, 100% free and reduced situation. During this time, we were actually in a pretty fortunate place. We, prior to COVID-19, had our own online learning management system. We had community Wi-Fi in place already, and we were one-to-one with devices. So it took us about 2 days to transition from learners being in the classroom to distance learning. We never said schools were closed. We never put that out there. We went from face-to-face learning in person to distance learning. Learning continues, and we're still staying in contact. That being said, we have a lot of the challenges that everybody else had, even though we felt like we were in a pretty good place. Trying to balance, what's going on right now, putting out fires, still putting out fires as they happen, while also planning for, what's the future look like. There's a lot of uncertainty, and I know there's a lot of CBOs on the line right here, and uncertainty is not something we deal with very well. Having to deal with staff, so you have, half your staff, everybody's getting paid, half of them are working, half of them aren't. So how do you deal with the inequities created by that? We did some MOUs really early on to try to outline a lot of those expectations. We've dealt with legalities around Zoom. We wanted our learning facilitators, our teachers, to be in contact with our kids. So we allowed them to use Zoom. Some districts don't. So there are a lot of varying methods going on there, but we had to deal with the legalities of, what are the risks involved in doing that? And so we tried to address that with some parent communication and some contracts and stuff for people to sign to outlay those. Another challenge was trying to stay in contact with all of our kids. There's a good population of our kids who, once we went to distance learning, even though we never said it was closed, considered school over. And parents felt like kids needed to come out and go work with them. So they'd go out and work in the field. And so we're still trying to keep the learning going. So that's been a challenge. Ensuring our teachers are trying to make contact, making the learning meaningful, not just superficial. And then trying to balance student engagement with a lack of incentive to stay connected. Because, there's no penalty for not doing the work going forward. It's really hard to keep the kids connected and make sure that they understand the learning. So a lot of those same challenges everybody else has had. But we also need to realize that the instructional models of teaching and learning in these systems that were being delivered on the previous structure have been completely upended. The previous structures that were supporting the old way of teaching and learning and organization are not necessarily going to work going forward. It's likely not going to go back to the way we did this in the past, but we'll turn into more of a blended learning approach. This is going to require new resources, new training, new structures, all kinds of new stuff. Also, this transition to distance learning has sent nationwide millions of children to unsafe places. So we need to realize that when this is over and as things change, there's going to be children that are different levels of emotional trauma and mental health needs than ever before. And we're going to need additional resources for that as well. A lot of times, even in our community, school is the safest place for these kids. And the last month and a half has been stressful for those who are no longer in that safe place. There's a lot of uncertainty about what the future looks like and what it's going to cost. There are some things we won't need to spend money on that we've spent money on in the past, but there's a lot of new things we're going to need to spend money on that we haven't spent money on before. We need to make sure that any plan we help establish, that they're flexible enough to adjust as necessary, which is always difficult, especially when you have statewide initiatives and things like that. As far as a management group, as a group of CBOs and professionals on the business side, we need to be solution oriented and have solutions, not just complain about why we can't do certain things that we're told to do. We need to be involved. If we don't pay attention and get involved, even though we're still putting out fires, what's going to happen is the politicians in Sacramento are going to create solutions for us without input. So we got to make sure we're all staying involved and providing input as much as we can. We need to be unified. We need to come up with a very short list of priorities. If we come up with 100 different things that we need done, then we won't get any of them because the legislature, again, will come up with their own solutions. Some of the big issues I'm seeing going forward that we really need, I think, unity on, in my opinion, flexibility around funding and attendance accounting. That's going to be huge going forward, especially if we get here, August, and we're still in a situation where we can't go back to the way things were before. And then also, I believe we're going to need litigation relief of some sort around special ed and other areas of the, that we're dealing with. Special ed's different now, unfortunately. There might be certain parts of IEPs that are going to be a lot more difficult to address or meet in a virtual environment. So that, that being said, we're all going through this new adventure right now. We don't know what the future holds for sure. We're kind of still waiting for information. I think we all need to be flexible, but we need to be unified and make sure that when we come up with solutions that they're well thought out, and that, again, we're unified and not throwing 100 different things at them. Otherwise, they will create our new future for us.
Thank you for that insightful perspective and the guidance for our group as we face this this very unknown situation ahead. I'd like to turn it over to Sarah, who probably the deepest in all of this work in terms of the policies and the budget considerations. So Sarah, if you would jump in, thank you.
Good morning. I would like to begin by thanking every single one of you for your hard work. This was insane, and I know it's a difficult and wild ride, like Mike Fine has said, that we are about to embark on. With that, I did want to provide a little bit more perspective of what happened on Tuesday when Governor Newsom released some talking points on the stages that he believes the state will roll out, reopening the economy and education, and that for education we fall under stage 2, given that we are so closely tied to the economy, to workers returning to work and having their children be in a safe space. With that, it does require several things at the disposal of the state that they have to prepare for and roll out before requiring us to restart. And so the lofty goal of July and August being that start date is contingent on increasing testing, accessibility to protective equipment and supplies, and that includes the education component. For CSBO, Tasha and I have been representing you as part of the new Reopening Schools Task Force with the State Superintendent Thurman. We're also part of a major collaboration with the statewide unions as well as statewide management. Our goal is really to ensure that your voice is in every single conversation. Without you, it is not possible. That is our goal. With that, our focus today in terms of the outcomes that we want to develop is to ensure that CSBO works in coordination at the state, federal, and local levels in the development of any guidance and participation in partnerships. We believe that it is critical to mitigate the impact of any ADA loss to push for an alternative reporting system, given that we are so tied to that for our funding, and to create a roadmap to reopening that recognizes our diversity, that genuinely provides best practices for our smalls, our rurals, urban, basic aid, and urbans. We want to make sure that we give you guys the tools and support that you need. So we want to turn then our attention to hearing directly from you. And so our guiding questions today, and we'll use the Q&A box to highlight if you want to make a comment. What support, what guidance information can CASBO seek clarification in this pursuit? We're beginning those conversations at the state level. We believe that in order to mitigate any litigation liability, there has to be statewide guidance to protect every single LEA on what is correct and what's appropriate and when, and recognizing that all of you have different guidance from your county health officials and that they also play a critical role in deciding when and how schools return back to school. So with that, I'll leave this question up for a second, and then we'll display another slide that has all the issues that we believe are at the high level to help engage with the conversation. And as we see you raise your hand or enter your name with a question, we'll call on your name. Clearly, we have 64 participants. I will get to as many as possible. We're recording our questions, and we will get this all collated so that we can take this back to our Monday meeting at the Department of Education and have rich conversations that need to be discussed before anything is then developed. With that, I'll open it up to putting names in the Q&A box. I'll give you a chance to think that through, and I'll redirect our presentation back to the slide. This slide. The first person I see is Dennis Schilling. It says, is there any possibility of using enrollment for attendance accounting next year rather than ADA? This would allow for certainty of funding for districts with likely fluctuation in attendance due to inevitable room sickness. We'll record that down. Alex Lucero. Once families go back to work and no one's at home to watch the students, how can we create a social distance school? And Christina, do you see anyone with hands, raising their hands to participate?
Yes, Dennis and Alex both. I've got a few more hands to participate. Let's go ahead and let me see if I can get them up here in order. To go ahead and unmute them and have some conversations.
Perfect.
Let's see. All right, I have a few more questions down here. Karen, Meg, and Audrey, a few more. They've all typed in their questions. Would you like to just continue going through the written questions or start unmuting to open up the conversations?
It would be nice to see if we could unmute.
Yeah, of course. Let's go in order. Karen Kimmel, I've unmuted you if you wanted to address the conversation.
Thanks. I think, Grant, the two biggest concerns that I have, I'm not sure how we can possibly, I know he said also not to be passive in this scenario, but how can we even begin planning for next year when we don't know what the rules are for funding? So yeah, we could have a third of the kids come every day, but does that mean our LCFF funding is going to be completely obliterated because we won't meet the minimum number of minutes, the number of days that they're in seats? So until we get, flexibility on that, we can't even be proactive, I don't feel like. And I think it's also a fine line between having local authority or local discretion and having the protections to help us with litigation, because we know we're sending people into what could be a potentially deadly situation. And if we've got the state that's actually directing us to do X, Y, and Z, then, you know, perhaps then there's some hold harmless there because we were following a state directive, or, you know what I'm saying? Like some kind of protections that we can work with our staff on and our parents.
Thank you.
All right.
Next person,
Meg,
Christina?
yeah, Meg, go ahead.
My question also was regarding the instructional minutes and having flexibility in that, because it doesn't seem like we're going to be able to hold these kids in school if a third or a half are coming every day, or not every day, but scattered, or whatever we decide to do, alternating days, weeks, whatever. They're not going to get, you know, the 240 every day. And if the rest of the day or the rest of the week they're doing distance learning, how do we know they're putting in the time? So we definitely need flexibility in the instructional minutes. And also, I think that the food service end of this is getting very expensive. We're not getting funding so far for what we're running right now, but yet we're paying for all of our staff. We're going to need flexibility in the rules on that too, because we could be, it's a split day. We, you know, do we feed one kid lunch and the other kid supper? I don't know. So just more flexibility would be great.
Perfect. Thank you. Next person, Christina?
Yes, Audrey Kilpatrick.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, my specific question this morning, like my question of the day, every day I have a new question, is our special ed department wants to run their ESY program, which is really a summer school program. And they're wondering, do they need to take attendance? How are they going to run it? It's going to be somewhat of a learning at home kind of thing, not independent study, not, you know, we're not taking attendance, but I'm just not sure what to tell them. They're really pushing to get it all set up and hire teachers and all that. And I have no answers on what to do with that. One of the other concerns, like we've talked about, is the instructional minutes and the instructional days are going to have to be modified. And if we have to have multiple phases, or, you know, of children coming in and out of school at different times of the day, and maybe we go to a year-round school versus 180 days, but that all has limitations that we have to negotiate with the teachers, and we don't have the money to pay them any more than we have now. So I am just really concerned that the state's not thinking about that, and they want us to do all these things, but they're not willing to give us the flexibility to be able to do that.
Thank you, Audrey.
All right, Tina Douglas.
Decide. Sorry. Good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, I just want to tell you guys, thank you very much for all the advocacy that you guys have been doing on behalf of school districts at the state level. I'm sure I speak for everybody. We really appreciate it. I think everybody really is saying the same thing. Obviously, we know we're all going through similar situations, and our districts may all be a little bit different just based on our demographics. But one of the things that I think would be helpful is have a full year plan. So no changes, saying that this is what the entire school year is going to look like, instead of saying we're going to look like this through the fall and then it might be something different in January, because it will be extremely difficult for us to plan, especially if we're looking at redesigning transportation and what that would look like in nutrition services, to have to rehire mid-year, I think would just be extremely difficult. So having a full year decision as opposed to saying something else may change differently within that same school year.
Thank you.
William Wong, hello.
This is William Wong. I'm the CBO in San Gabriel Unified in Los Angeles County. Two things actually, and one is I know CBOs in my area and the JPAs are concerned about liability. If in opening too soon, and then let's say there's a COVID outbreak and 4 or 5 students in a class or somewhere have COVID, what are the potential liability? What is the potential liability to that? I don't, it's not really a question, but it's just something to take into consideration if we open too soon. And then kind of piggybacking off of other speakers, Dr. Fauci said that a second wave of coronavirus is inevitable. So in the flexibility with whenever we start opening again, we're all going to have to prepare to close again, I'm thinking, and adapting. So whatever the legislature says in minimum minutes, if they say, all right, let's have the number of minutes, it might be difficult because we don't know what the future holds. So just, yes, greater flexibility all around.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin Roche. Kevin had asked a question: with all the discussions of social distancing models for schools reopening, it is important for the state to understand the additional financial impact of such measures. Are they looking at additional funding for these possible social distancing scenarios?
There was a hearing on Tuesday with the Assembly Subcommittee. The reason I wrote in the news break on Wednesday the importance to reach out to your legislators is that they are disconnected. Although they've been in their district offices due to travel restraints, they have not taken the time to really research, talk to superintendents and board members and yourselves as CBOs. And so in their minds, they still have not been able to grapple with the reality that the state has only attained 39% of the general fund support during this time period because the state has delayed personal income tax receipts until July 15. So it is critical to engage with these legislators who are returning next week to begin the budget deliberation process, because unfortunately, they don't understand that in this pandemic, LEAs have not attained any flexibility and you providing services as if we were not in a crisis mode. So this is why it's critical to engage with them, to really paint that picture that we have lost revenue collections in so many areas, in child nutrition, transportation, catering services, child care, after school programs, any program that generated you local revenue dollars, renting spaces, all those options are no longer available in this last fiscal quarter. So for us, we're trying to educate them and really make that a reality so that we can flex as many dollars as possible and get them to focus on the federal level and advocate for additional education dollars.
Thank you. Charlotte Kelsey. Charlotte has a couple questions in the panel. Charlotte, did you want to speak on that? Any discussion of a 5-day waiver and allowing a 175-day versus 180?
Yeah, we're trying to look right now at the different cuts that we might be able to make in our district. We're a really small district. We have about 1,500 students. So looking at, would we maybe be able to do any furloughs? Have we heard anything about going to 175-day school year like we did in the recession time?
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Karen, you have some additional questions posted?
Yes, I think William might have just had the same question where with the litigation concerns, if it's a directive from the state, I just want to clarify, we were told that a lot of students or children are asymptomatic and they carry the virus and they don't even know it, they don't have a fever, so they come into school, contaminate or, get other students, to be carriers who take it home, and then somebody in their household gets sick and God forbid dies. Is that a lawsuit coming back on the school district? And are we looking to the fact that the state required us to be open, or, so if we were following the rules of the state, that might be some kind of protection. And thank you so much for doing all of this.
We are here for you. That is my responsibility, to be your voice in Sacramento and DC, and we take our job very seriously. So please put everything down, and at the end of the session, anyone, if something gets triggered, we will provide my email, and we just want the subject to be reopening schools so we could track those emails correctly. Like I mentioned, I'm in meetings with the state on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. So I think it's very critical to get your voice, and we just began on Wednesday. So a little deep breath, they are not that far along, but I want to make sure that your voice is part of these conversations.
Thank you, Sarah. At this time, I see no open questions or hands raised.
And then I did, if we're getting ready to wrap up, I did want to mention one more comment. We were able to coordinate a meeting with Cal LEAs, the Office of Emergency Services. We know that many LEAs are having a difficult time attaining protective equipment, masks, gloves, and cleaning supplies. And so yesterday's meeting, we were able to coordinate with them that any purchases that they're making at the state level, LEAs are able to contract and purchase equipment through the county emergency health centers and to attain those supplies. And so we made it a point to ensure that schools and childcare centers are also prioritized in attaining equipment, because if we are to open, we need to ensure that you all have the supplies to maintain your facilities in healthy and safe environments clean.
Thank you, Sarah. I have some additional comments. Dennis, I saw you had your hand up recently. I also have William Wong with some additional.
So, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You just answered one of the questions I had, which had to do with supplies, making sure those are very difficult to come up with. We're finding they're also very costly. So whether it's masks, et cetera. The other thing, just, what William brought up about liability, it's a really big issue, even if we follow state directives. For instance, okay, we go with social distancing. All somebody has to say is, okay, how do you prove you kept the social distancing as it should have been, that every kindergartner was kept 6 feet apart? I see this as a really big slippery slope on this issue. I don't know what the solution is, but I think it just really needs to be pressed with the legislators that this is a big issue. And no matter what guidelines they put out, some of those guidelines are going to be almost impossible to enforce. I mean, you've got special ed classrooms where it'd be very difficult to keep these kids away from each other. And And how do you keep kindergartners 6 feet away from each other when they can't even count to 6? They don't know what 6 feet is. You're gonna have to, there is that cost of having the additional adults, but then that additional liability of someone saying, well, how do you prove you kept everybody away from each other as you should, et cetera. So I just wanted to throw that in, that just kind of second that to me is one of the biggest issues.
Thank you.
William.
Hi, yeah, just the other consideration on liability. I think technically the state didn't direct schools to close. It's individual districts' decisions to close. So that's where I'm afraid of liability. If the state or governor says, all right, let's open up with social distancing the schools in September or whenever, it's up to school boards. So I think the liability still remains with school districts, and it's, well, school district, you decided to open, I know everyone else is, and Sacramento said to open, but so I don't know what the answer is to that, but I just want to put it on CASBO's radar, and I just thank CASBO for everything you're doing.
And this is something we will make sure to bring up in our Monday and Thursday evenings. We meet with all the executives, with CSBA, AXA, and the small school districts and SESA. So we will make sure that on our Monday phone call, aside from all the texting I do with their GR director, that we bring this up to their attention, that, again, as part of the statewide framework, all of this needs to be assumed at the state level as their responsibility in order to move forward.
And then Sarah, I have 2 questions seeking guidance on where they can access those supplies from the state level.
And we were told to contact your emergency health officials. So Cal LEAs has local offices at each of the counties, and that they are the ones procuring from the state equipment. Send me a separate email to my account, and we will make sure to get you that appropriate contact health officials so that we could send out a news break with all of their contact information to just make it easier on you. But at this point, we were told each of your county health, emergency centers, and then that they're the ones procuring at the state level all of the supplies and moving it through each of the counties, and that schools can apply and purchase directly through them.
Thank you, Sarah. Dennis, I do still see a raised hand. Go ahead and unmute you if you have some additional comments.
No, I just hadn't unraised it, I guess.
That's fair. That's fair. Thank you, Dennis. All right. Again, at this time, I have no open questions or raised hands.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Your time is so valuable, and our commitment to you is to not only continue the work that we've been doing, again, as Sarah said, to be the voice of you as these decisions are made, making sure the tail's not wagging the dog, but also we're going to continue our two-way communication with you. As Sarah mentioned, when questions come up as you leave here, go ahead and direct those to her. We are going to be analyzing the information and really taking 2 paths with that. One is, we've already talked about, is informing better decision making across the street. We're physically across the street right now, so across the street, but also to turn this information into tools for you to use. We've got some Excel spreadsheets and templates coming your way to capture your thoughts, to really analyze those different options as you consider the path that you're going to take to return to school. So again, two-way communication ongoing for the weeks and months to come. And you'll be seeing more CBO forums as we have hundreds of folks interested in participating. We'll consolidate that information, analyze that information, and come back out to you. Do not hesitate to know what we can do to continue to support the great work that you're doing in the field. Have a great one. And again, much appreciated.